Tony, over to you, sir. Thank you very much for running this.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I get started, this is my first time speaking at a government event. Is my mic on? You guys hear me? No. Give me a mic out there. Mic check. Mic number, I think I'm mic number 2. Bring it up a little bit. Here we go. Does that sound good? I do like to walk around, yes, and I will walk around. All right, so that's good? You guys all hear me? So what I wanted to say, it was the first time speaking in front of a government event. I am actually intrigued by the fact that as soon as it started, everybody sat down and everybody was quiet. I'm not used to that, so thank you very much for that. The other thing I want to say is I'm actually humbled to be in the presence of so many who serve our government. I want to thank you very much for your service. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start by telling you a little story. It's a story about, it's been raining 3 days in a southern town, and a gentleman is looking out about 2 feet of water outside his house. The river has kind of come up, and he's looking out, and all of a sudden an emergency services guy in a boat comes by with a bullhorn, and he says, sir, the National Weather Service has said we're going to have rain for another 3 days. This situation is going to get a lot worse. I need you to get in the boat right now so I can take you to safety and higher ground. And with that, the man looks down and says, I've been a man of faith my whole life. I believe the good Lord will take care of me in my time of need. And with that, the boat leaves. Day goes by. Now he's in the second floor of his house. The water's actually in his house. It's about 6 feet high. He's looking out, and the same emergency services boat goes by. The gentleman with the bullhorn says the same thing. Sir, National Weather Service says this is going to get worse before it gets better. I need you to get in the boat so I can take you to safety. Man says the exact same thing. No need. I'm a man of faith. I know the good Lord will take care of me. Another day goes by. He's actually standing on his roof. The water is completely in his house. This time, emergency services comes by with a helicopter. And the helicopter, he drops down the ladder. He says, sir, this is the last time. I really need you to grab that so I can take you to safety. The man says the exact same thing. Now, a little bit more time goes by. He's standing on his chimney. The water's up to here. He's looking up. And he says, God, how can you forsake me in this my time of greatest need? And with that, the rain stops, the clouds part, and a light shines down on the man, and a voice says, oh, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What are you waiting for? All right, so why do I start with that joke? I start with that joke because they told me this group doesn't like to laugh, but I kind of found out you do. All right, so but I tell that joke for one reason. It's about somebody who missed obvious signs. Okay, and when I talk to groups about technology and innovation, there are often signs that are presenting themselves that people miss, and some of them are very obvious. What we're going to do on this panel is go through some of them. We're going to talk about not government travel per se. We're going to talk about government travel at the crossroads. We're going to talk about some hot topics that are going to, we think, or I think, and I think the panel will agree, that are going to force you to think differently, because there are some signs about what's going out there in travel. So with that, let me get started. The session outline, I've broken it up. We got an hour and 15 minutes or so. I got 3 parts. First is a hot topic, thought leadership panel. I've got some phenomenal speakers here. I will introduce them in a second. Second part is I'm going to switch it up a little bit. I'm going to throw some statements out there, and I'm going to ask my panel, I'm going to also ask you, which one of the statements is closer to the truth? Okay? And the last part, I'm going to ask my panelists to make some predictions about what they think is going to happen. Now, audience participation is allowed throughout, so I noticed you asked some questions this morning. There's microphones out there. I might be walking around because I like to do that.
No problem.
So please, if you've got a question, raise your hand. You want to make a comment, please do that. We'd like to make this interactive. All right, so let's get to our panelists here. You met him earlier this morning, Bill Mansell, Director of Defense Travel Management Office. How about a round of applause for being brave enough to get up here? he keeps telling me take it easy. He keeps telling me take it easy with me, and I'm like, you're the subject matter expert. You're the actual customer. You actually travel for the government and run the program. So I'm not going to take it easy with you. You got to take it easy on us. All right, next up is Erika Moore, VP of Americas for Travelport. Please, a round of applause for Erika. Mike Koetting, Executive Vice President, Supplier and TMC Services for Concur. Thank you, Mike. And the last but not least, Nick Vournakis, President, U.S. Military and Governments for CWTSato. Nick, welcome. Now, I was very conscious the way we put this panel together, okay, if you notice, it's kind of the four constituents that we think are necessary or in the conversation when it comes to technology and travel, right? So you've got the guy that's going to consumer program. You've got a technology provider who provides the underpinning, the GDS, the Travelport. Then Mike is providing the solutions, both an expense solution and a travel solution, and Nick is the service provider, right? The travel agency that kind of helps you run through it all, okay? So with that, we got a great subject matter expertise here on the stage. And let's get to our first hot topic. Anybody recognize that one? What that stands for? All right, so first one's Google. All right, show of hands, how many of you have ever done a search on Google? Anybody not done it? You got a couple of Bing guys out there? No, everybody does. Everybody uses Google, right? All right, how many of you booked or shopped for something on Amazon? Yeah, got a couple people did that too. How many of you have Facebook accounts? Yeah? Are you going to post something from this event? No one else going to like it? Okay. And then how about Apple? Any of you have an Apple device, either here or at home? All right, so everybody knows what these guys do. They impact your daily life. You're using them for search, you're using the phone, you're shopping, you're communicating with people via social media and Facebook. But these companies do a lot more than what you think they do. When we look at, this is a slide I pulled down, they're just to show all of the businesses and all of the things that these companies are doing. I do a presentation that calls the most powerful companies in the world, and these are 4 of them. They are clearly the most powerful and influential companies in the world, based on how they have impacted all of our lives in a very simple way as consumers, but then beyond that, they're getting into a lot more than just the consumer part. So that leads us to our first hot topic for this morning. Hot topic number 1, the impact of GAFA. We all know that Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple have a significant impact on the way we live. So the first question to my panel is, how have these tech giants impacted the travel industry? So I'm going to talk with my travel industry spokes first. Nick, just talk to us in general about at CWT, how these big giants are impacting your business.
So I think the biggest impact these types of companies have is really around our expectations around e-commerce. And if you take a look at each and every one of those, they have done something formidable with the way, as consumers anyway, we buy stuff through digital platforms, whether it's the impact of a social network in terms of influence and preferencing. Apple really kind of turned the music industry upside down with this notion of I can buy a single song rather than an entire album. Things like personalization, which Amazon does incredibly well. So really our whole notion of electronic commerce has necessarily changed as a result of what these companies do. And if you think about the impact that has on electronic commerce in the world of business travel, I would say their impact has been kind of a very slow bleed. Because while we have lots of available tools to buy stuff, buy travel online, that experience hasn't gotten tremendously smarter since its inception 20 years ago. 20 years ago, e-booking was created, and all it did was automate a process that used to be fairly manual, but it was 100% linear, or is 100% linear. I start a new search, it's new every time. I have to go through air, and then I can go through hotel, and then I can go through car potentially. So that process has just not gotten any more intelligent along the way. And these companies, I think, are really the benchmark for how to do that stuff in a much smarter kind of way. They have improved the process of buying demonstrably, and that's where I think we're going to see the biggest impact, is how we can make a process, not automate a process, but leverage technology to make it smarter.
All right, so Mike, you're a tech provider. You must get the question all the time, how come it's not as easy as buying something on Amazon?
Right.
So how do you deal with that?
So I think one of the challenges, as Nick mentioned, is that those consumer sites have created an expectation of ease of purchase. And so, I mean, that's the idea. All these sites are trying to create for you a one-click purchasing experience. So they're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to buy as much as possible. That's dramatically different than what most organizations are trying to accomplish. That frankly, they're trying to make it a little more difficult for you to purchase, and they would like you to purchase as little as possible. So there can be an inherent conflict between the experience that people have as consumers on these retail sites versus the experience that we have intentionally created on the business site. And I think, I loved our speaker this morning, Mr. Bergen. I think at times we have created too great a gap. We have created too much friction in making it intentionally difficult for you to purchase as little as possible versus that consumer experience.
Yeah. And show of hands, how many of you have ever had the complaint it's not as easy as using a consumer site? Yeah, so it's pretty much there. Erika, you're an underpinner, so you're a content aggregator. And I'm assuming you get compared to Google too, because Google has created a place that organizes the world's information. You guys have been organizing the world's travel information for many years. So tell us about how you look at these companies and how they either excite you or annoy you or scare you.
Well, we don't get compared to Google because we're better than Google, right? But I will say, what a serious crowd, that you are very serious. But I will say this, I think that the deep transformation that these 4 brands have driven is not only around the way that we consume or purchase and drive e-commerce, but more importantly, they have transformed the way we view our lives. They have dramatically changed the way an individual interacts, purchases, lives, and frankly leads their life. That's the true transformation. And I think that from a technology perspective, it's the openness of the platform. It's the ability to no longer rely on a single source for anything. And it's having that flexibility to allow multiple interactions, integrations, and iterations of technology to constantly improve our lives. That's the true path that technology is driving for everyone.
Got it. All right, so I'm going to pull up my next 2 questions because they're going to be aimed right at you, Bill.
But can I comment on this?
Yeah, go, please.
I'd like to throw in on
go
this
ahead.
as well. So you heard John Bergen talk earlier about government and the need to interact better with industry. And so as I look at this situation here, and I'm looking at it from a functional perspective right now, so what do these organizations give us? What is it that I'm interested in? So as I look at Google, and as I look at a functional and a user, and as an executive, I think Google Analytics.
Okay.
So why do I think Google Analytics? Because it gives me trend. It gives me data. We talked about data earlier. You kind of need data. Our decisions should be data-driven. Analytics will help us to understand who's checking our pages, why they're checking, what particular frames that they're going to, why they're going to it. And I think that will help us to better design our applications.
So you're talking about actually leveraging Google to help you understand more about who's coming and using your service.
Exactly.
Very good.
As I look at Amazon, so everybody talked about from a purchasing perspective, but I look at it a little differently. So I look at Amazon Cloud, because if we have a capability, we have to have somewhere to store it at, and there has to be a FedRAMP approved capability as well. So any system, any capability, any service that we buy, and that ties into the security piece that John Bergen was talking about earlier. You have to meet a certain capability, a certain standard. The government cybersecurity folks, and the security folks from Amazon or whatever capability or organization will work that out. When you look at Facebook and you look at social media, it makes me think of strategic communications. Something that I have to do, and we talked about it today, is communicate. We have to reach out to our customers, our travelers. They have to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, when we're going to do it. Social media is one application that we could potentially leverage.
Not doing it yet.
We're not doing it yet. Some parts of the government are. So I'm speaking and I'm looking at it strictly as Bill Mansell right now in travel. I think from the Defense Travel Management Office, it is a capability that we could consider and perhaps should consider. And then, of course, when you look at Apple, I really think hardware perspective, we talked about iPhones. Many of the federal government agencies are using iPhones right now. So that raises the issue of mobile applications and the ability to access applications from a mobile perspective. So I see the potential, for using Apple as as the foundation, for greater mobile, providing greater mobile
Somewhere
capability.
down the road. So it sounds like you're touching already on potentially using some of these
Potentially
things.
using.
That was my next question. And then there could be a lot more that you might use them for.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I also think that these applications have created a better educated travel buyer.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it's fair to say, at least when I began my professional travel career 25 years ago, I didn't have any experience shopping and purchasing travel on my own, and I really required a lot of hand-holding and a lot of guidance. I think there's a lot. I think about my son now, who just started in industry, graduated from college, and he's like, "Hey, I got it. Like, I don't need you to hold my hand. I've seen the travel sites. I don't need as much expertise to execute a transaction." And so I think that's the other part of this is the actual intelligent and well-informed shopping, buying, and transaction execution has been facilitated by these services. So our travelers, I think, are much able to do a good job of that on their own.
Yeah, and this was a study done not too long ago that said that all travel search for air, about 60% of them start on Google. People just type in New York to Rome.
Google Flights is, and that was interesting when you listed all the things that Google does. It's kind of buried in there in search, but Google Flights and to a lesser extent Google Hotels actually is having a dramatic impact on the industry.
Go ahead.
And I think that one of the things that is a huge conflict, if you will, that the travel industry is coming across is that you have this huge transformation in the lives of all individuals being driven by these types of either social media or apps. And yet, for the travel industry, we have traditionally wanted to hold on to our legacy service offerings. And that's the big break, right? You have your son and all of the millennials who are now avid travelers, and they don't want to be serviced the same way. So is it all online? Is it all through apps? And we have found, amazingly enough, that it's not all through apps. They do value the face-to-face interaction, but they want it done in a different manner. And it's this evolution of the transformation of the traveler that practically seems to have been born traveling that is really the challenge that we have to overcome as a travel industry.
Bill, you're shaking your head, so jump in on that. Just from the perspective of the government traveler, right? Because they're no different. I mean, this is a young guy, might have just gotten orders, but it's not as if he just he's been around for a while, and he's grown up with these technologies.
Yeah.
So when he comes to work at the government, what's his expectation? Is that something you guys think about?
We do think about that, and as we have this conversation, what comes to mind for me specifically is a part of the travel industry, government travel industry, that we have forgotten about right now. Well, perhaps forgotten is not the right choice of words, but we haven't focused on, emphasized as much as we should have, and that's the reserve component type. And I think about them, and I think about the fact that while they may have a CAT card, they don't necessarily have access to computers because they're reservists, and they have reserve training that they have to do. And so how do we give them the type of capability so that they can come in and they can do reserve training on a monthly basis or twice a year as they have to do? And so as I look at that, it kind of tells me that whole idea of change. We have to provide the capability to them, and then at the same time, we have to reach out and talk to them about how they want to travel. One of the things I've heard from them is Apple Pay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's right. Eliminate the whole idea.
So eliminate the whole idea.
Exactly having a report.
So, and so leveraging an iPhone and Apple Pay, if something like that were possible, if we could work towards that, would solve a major problem for a whole segment of the government that I'm now concerned with.
No, and that's totally true. I have two daughters, 28, 25. Neither of them has a neither of them has a checkbook. They do not write checks, right? They either immediately pay. Right now, Mike's a little nervous about that because he's in an expense company. But there's plenty of us old guys, and we got all this government audience.
You still got to get paid back. So there's still a reimbursement process.
Good point. Good point. All right. Any other question from the audience? Anybody? Anybody on this one? All right, we'll let it go. Let's go to hot topic number 2. How about the sharing economy? Anybody here ever been in an Uber? Did you take an Uber here today? All right, there you go. All right, so in June of 2017, so about 7-8 months ago, Uber averaged 5.5 million rides a day. I picked that month because that was the month that Lyft surpassed 1 million rides a day. So collectively, the two biggest car-sharing companies in the U.S. do 6.5 million rides a day as of June, okay, of last year. Anybody done an Airbnb? Just a few? Yeah, we got a few here that do it. All right, so biggest night to date in August of this year, 2.5 million people staying on the platform in one night. They are the biggest hospitality company in the world, bar none. Okay, they have about 5 times the volume of Starwood Marriott. Okay, now, not sure they're hitting your market yet, but they're absolutely impacting the travel industry. And so both of these companies, just the concept of both, okay? So let's get to our panel here and let's see the impact of the sharing economy, right? What impact will this have on government travel? Bill, I'm going to start with you. What impact do these sharing companies and the concept of sharing have in general?
So this is an area where greater data analysis, I think, would be very useful for us as well to determine how travelers are traveling. So you hear John Bergen talk about that. Those of you that were in DoD Connect yesterday heard me talk about that as well as one of our strategic initiatives. But let me say this. The first question is does policy even allow it? And we've talked about policy a little bit. And the answer to that question is yes. So Lyft, Uber, without a doubt, no problem, it can be used. What we have to sort out is how much is being used, why it's being used, and so that gets back to some of the questions that I had earlier. So are we moving in that direction, and do we have an issue with that? No. From my perspective in the Defense Travel Management Office, the answer is no. But let's talk about Airbnb for a moment. And let's talk about that from a policy perspective. Hotels, and this is policy, but this is also driven by legislation, and so that's a key thing that we have to always consider when we're talking about the travel industry. Hotels that government travelers use have to be FEMA approved, and they have to meet FEMA standards and guidelines. So Airbnb, there's a potential challenge with that. So if a traveler uses it today and they submit a receipt, we will pay for it, but we have an issue there that we have to take on and solve, and we haven't solved it yet.
Got it. Erika, talk about content with respect to, you're a content aggregator.
Yep.
These guys are kind of outside. You actually see people shifting to some of this stuff. So how do you guys deal with it?
So absolutely. Particularly in the TMC space, we have seen a huge decline in number of traditional car rentals just because of the uptake of Uber and Lyft. Interestingly enough, just yesterday there was an article that came out on shared economies and how Uber and Lyft are driving everything except shared economies. They are, in some instances, they are being used instead of public transportation systems because of how inexpensive they can be. But from a content perspective, really, it's about having that breadth and depth of choice. It's about making sure that you have absolutely all of the options available because, and government travel is no exception. It's comprised not only of duty travel, but also, families coming to different types of services for government events are a huge leisure aspect of that, and that also needs to be considered. So the variety of options that you need to make sure that everything is considered so that the content is not the issue.
Nick, I want to switch to you first because as a travel management company, you need to consider how people are getting around. How are you guys dealing with the sharing economy?
So I look at it from a slightly different perspective, which is I think one of the advantages of the tremendous uptake in both Uber and Lyft is that they have provided a lot more visibility into an area of travel spend that is, for all intents and purposes, largely ignored. It's largely ignored because it's a small piece of a much bigger pie. But what Uber and Lyft bring to the table are reporting capabilities that, through their commercial solutions, that allow, I think, an organization to start doing a lot better compare-contrast in terms of what am I spending on ground transportation, so on those local vouchers, in those specific metros, and does it take a little bit of legwork to dig through the data and understand what that means? Absolutely. But from a user experience perspective, you know, Uber and Lyft have just effectively made it a lot easier than not walking outside and holding up your hand or making a phone call. So I think, you know, regardless of approved or not, I think they're going, you know,
Do it anyway.
yeah,
They're doing it now.
the travelers are going to vote with their feet. From our standpoint, I'd like to, you know, as that layer in the middle, you know, how can we make the experience better? We've done some interesting things just from technical integration, so that, you know, if by chance you're using kind of an application that has your itinerary stored, so, you know, we know effectively you're flying into, so Tony, you know, we know you're flying into Reagan, we know you're staying at the Hilton. If you were to access Uber from our app, it would preload your destination. So
make it a little easier.
Is it a huge pain point to solve? No, but at least we're adding value along the way. Airbnb is a little bit different, other than just kind of integrated reporting, so that, again, you can get some compare-contrast versus what it costs to use Airbnb in a certain location versus another. I don't see the Airbnb use cases really prevalent in the government market, and, you know, Bill touched on the idea of getting FEMA approved before that's even going to be, it's pretty much a non-starter. I can tell you, however, on the corporate side, we've done some analysis, and there do tend to be fairly material cost savings by using Airbnb, especially in high-density markets where there is potentially a shortage of hotel supply. So just from a cost perspective, that can be interesting.
Mike, as the solution provider, I think you've kind of figured it out already, where you can pull some of the spend in.
Yeah, so I think Nick touched on some great points. Is the availability of this systematized data offers a couple advantages. So particularly, you know, it's very standard with Concur in our corporate solution that a traveler, their Uber receipts automatically come into Concur, automatically go into their expense report, automatically get reimbursed. So there's no more of like, I got a paper receipt, I got to take a picture, I got to fill a thing out. Like, it's all magic, it all just happens. In addition to that, though, that gives you an opportunity to improve your safety and security, because now you have this instantaneous ride information. It's not only in the traveler's expense report, but it's also in your safety and security location services. So you're able to see, okay, well, yeah, he may have been at that hotel at some point last night, but with this event actually occurred, he had just taken an Uber to this location. So it can facilitate a better safety and security. Last thing I want to add is just we've seen the same trend with Airbnb displacing traditional hotel, not to the same degree that Uber and Lyft have displaced rental car. It is interesting to wonder, though, Uber and Lyft are both losing a couple $2 billion a year.
Yes.
So the market is kind of subsidizing that attractive price differential versus rental car companies that are expected to keep, you know, making a profit. So I do think, you know, that price gap will somewhat narrow at some point as these companies go IPO and are expected to make a profit. But I think from a traveler perspective, they're growing very ingrained in that habit of, well, why would I rent a car?
Right.
I just get an Uber.
Isn't that the Concur
To that,
growth model?
to that point about the losing money, I think the inflection point for them is around driverless cars. So if you know a little bit about the Uber model, I spent a couple of years in the ground transportation industry, and I tell people all the time that if a doctor gave me 6 months to live, I'd go back to that industry because it would feel like 6 years. Because it's a really hard business. It's a really hard business. It's razor thin margin. They pay Uber drivers, they give them about 75% of the fare. Okay, so when you think about that, the other 25%, that's why they're losing all the money. But I think what they're trying to do is when the economics flip, now they'll get 75% because there's no more driver, right? They'll have to pay a little bit of technology, but they're all being invested in by General Motors, invested in Lyft. They're taking big positions in these companies because they want to place their vehicles whether there's a driver or not. So it'll be interesting to see.
That's a great point, and I think, so that's a pivot that those car companies are moving towards. I think you see Airbnb trying to make that same sort of pivot, right? So they're saying, hey, I get it, you know, certainly, you know, in corporate travel, they're trying to say, let's integrate, you know, our content Certainly in Concur, you can see Airbnb content along with other hotels, and they're trying to make the same sort of corporate convenience for certain properties that are certified as meeting these corporate criteria. I would expect that they would be doing the same for
trying to
you
reach
as well.
out to the government and say, hey, let me give you a FEMA certification. Bill, we talked a little bit in the prep about there's the various different ways the government travel.
Yes.
One of them is when you're actually moving a family. You see Airbnb potentially being part of something like that, make it a little easier for the family, put them in a house, an Airbnb house?
So that's an interesting question. I think that is clearly a possibility and something that could be looked at. There's a lot of work that we need to do with respect to what we call permanent duty travel. That capability is not even in DTS today.
So completely outside the realm
So
of
completely outside scope. And there are a lot of reasons for that if you kind of factor in the complexity of it as well. And then if you add in the fact that there are household goods with that as well, do you add household goods into the mix as well? So are there some opportunities out there? Are we looking at it? If you think back to what John Bergen had said earlier, we're starting with business travel first, but there's 6 other types of travel that are out there. At some point in time in the future, we're going to take a look at those as well and move forward. And so is it possible? Yes. And to kind of follow from what John was saying, from my perspective, the door is open, the sky is the limit, and there is a solicitation that's going to be on the street soon. So come back, industry, and tell me, what is it that you propose? What do you think the best solution, the best way forward? We'll take a look at it.
Looks good. All right, go ahead, Erika.
Just on that topic, I think that for Airbnb, one thing that we have to think about is why are Uber and Lyft so successful? And if you think about it, it's really the technology and how seamless they make it for the traveler to really carry on with their normal life. It has an integrated duty of care capability, maybe not that sophisticated, but it's that technology offering that they bring to the table that really makes them so successful from a user perspective. And, from a technology standpoint, that is the real challenge. We have to make sure that the technology is embedded at every single point of the customer journey in a way that it feels that seamless.
Excellent. All right, let's close it down there. Let's move on to hot topic number 3, mobility and the smartphone. I actually pulled some of this data. There's a study done in August of last year. It talked about mobile device trends on government websites. So this is people coming to look at government websites and what types of devices they are using. So mobile usage has changed people's expectations of how they want to engage with consumer web type content. It spawned the mindset of a mobile first. So people are using their phones more prevalently every day. You can see the numbers here, right? The numbers on desktop and mobile, they've literally almost what is it, like 40-some% are actually hitting your websites or hitting government websites using their phones. And the last part is it's really the growth driver of most of everything that's going on. So every conference I go to on the technology side, if you don't have a mobile strategy, you're lost, you're done, right? You have to be there. You have to be on the mobile side, all right? So with that, let's move to hot topic number 3, mobility in the smartphone. In the upcoming solicitation, it just hit the streets, how important is considering the rising use of smartphones? Did you guys actually think through that? Is it in there, or are you open to suggestions as you suggest?
So the short answer for that, because the solicitation is not actually on the street yet,
Got it. Okay.
is as a rule, the federal government is looking at that and thinking about that.
Okay, good.
So I've kind of answered your question, I think.
Go ahead.
As a rule, in general,
In
that is what
general.
we're
Yeah,
looking
you
at,
have
and that
to.
is the
You
direction
have
that we're
to.
moving in.
Who
Yeah.
doesn't have does anybody not have a smartphone? There he is.
No, Bill.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like
No,
to
he said have a
introduce you to Fred
smartphone.
He
Flintstone.
doesn't.
No, I have a smartphone. No, I
Did you
have
bring Wilmington?
I have a smartphone. I have a smartphone.
What do you have? What do you have? You have any type? No cell phone.
Ooh.
I love that guy. I swear to God, when I retire, I'm getting rid of everything. I like it. Good for you. Go ahead, Mike.
So again, just thinking back to our speaker, Mr. Bergen, this morning, and talking about going from 1,200 pages of policy to 12 and a simplification of the form. So I think I'm certainly not the first person to say that the strategy should be mobile first. But there are some the reality of the constraints of real estate that looks like this. And so it's possible to execute a transaction if you're trying to comply with a 12-page policy. it's very difficult to execute a transaction if you've got 100 boxes and 100 checks and 100 processes you have to go through for a 1,200-page policy. So again, I think our speaker this morning demonstrated very eloquently how that process simplification, that policy simplification opens the door to much more frictionless transaction execution. Most likely you'd see the benefit on a mobile device.
Got it. Go ahead, Nick. Because you guys have invested pretty significantly in mobile.
But I would, again, I think mobile is just a digital channel. As heavily as you invest into mobile, you can't lose sight of the online world, and that if you look at everything digital, there's something to be said for this idea that experience is consistent across all those platforms. And I love that. I think it's a big myth that it's millennials that are driving kind of this mobile-first attitude. It's not a generational thing. It's a human thing. As humans, we become totally obsessed with the idea of consuming information at a moment's notice. Right. It's why if you look at anybody standing in line at the airport, at Starbucks, or Dunkin' Donuts, wherever you may be, what's everybody in line who's waiting doing? They're staring at their phone because it's immediate information that they can consume. So, and Mike, I think, is very, very right that the decision, there's a tremendous amount of intelligence that needs to go into display on a 3x4 screen versus a 24-inch monitor, and that necessarily means that we have to start making that shopping process smarter. So, for the idea that I work here in DC every week, but I still live in Minneapolis, and invariably I'm on the same flight out Monday and home on Thursday.
So why show you anything else?
Exactly, and it's not because that's my choice. It is my choice, but it's also well within policy. I think it's also another myth that it's this idea that we can't be policy compliant and have a digital forward strategy. These two things are not mutually exclusive. They can be done. Is it harder to do with a 1,200-page policy? Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So does process simplification help along the way? Yes, but what's really important is this idea that we have to make that experience consistent across all the channels. And if you look at I give the supply base a lot of credit because as an airline you can do that on your website and your app. If I'm using the Delta app or the Delta site, it's a pretty consistent experience. But the minute you're a business traveler and you're expecting to do some shopping, that experience becomes totally fragmented and disjointed, and nobody has really done a great job in industry at solving for normalizing that. And we're struggling to get there. We have to work with tech partners like these guys in order to make that happen, and we generally do a pretty decent job at that. So that's the challenge. It's this idea of it's not just not solving the problem in a silo. You're solving a problem for industry. So we all have to find the right way to work with each other to do that.
Yep. Erika, go ahead, because I know you guys have invested pretty significantly.
Yeah, and yes, we have. We have actually purchased an entire digital and mobile company out in Ireland. But I will challenge a bit the fact that it's not generational. I do think it's generational. And there's a study out there that we had around digitalization, and it shows that the U.S. is number 11 in a ranking of 19 countries. And in the top consumers were Latin America and Asia. And there's a reason for that, and it's because they were forced to skip the generation of the actual PCs, and they went right to their phone. It was driven by economics, not so much by anything else. But it was the newer generations that just dived into mobile. However, I do believe that while policy, and as John Bergen was explaining earlier, has to get simpler around all of this, at the end of the day, the traveler does put a lot of data out there already, and it's in multiple sites. So it is up to the technology providers to find a way to integrate it and bring it together because it's out there already.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I would just like to add in one other comment as well. So in addition to perhaps generational, there's also a geographical aspect to it as well, and I want to go back to the reserve components again and that perspective that I talked to earlier. In many instances, where a person is located at has a great deal to do with the type of communication or how they would interact with systems as well. And so the mobile aspect gives them that flexibility to tie into it as well. And I just continue to hone on that a bit because there's a large component of the military population that is reserve component. I'm very sensitive to that now as well, and so I want to make sure that that is something that is acknowledged also. There's a geographical aspect and capability aspect as well. Many people don't have access to anything but mobile phones, so that's the only way that they have to communicate. And if I could touch on policy for just a minute, because we've talked about simplifying policy. So this is my perspective, 17 months in the job now. So the policy has always encouraged these types of applications. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. The intent of the policy people, the reason that we do policy and that we have policy in many respects is to save money. John Bergen talked about it earlier. We want to save money, you want to make money. But that's what the majority of our policy perspectives are. So what we've tried to do with simplification of policy is just accomplish the same thing that we've done before, but do it in fewer pages. Okay, so mostly from a high-level perspective. But I just want to make sure it's clear. We have always encouraged innovation. That has always been the intent of the Program Management Office for those that preceded me. So I just want to make sure that's clear and give credit to my predecessors as well.
Very good. All right. Yes. All right, let's move on to hot topic number 4. Oh, no, before we do that, true or false. I'm going to mix it up a little bit. True or false really fast. Former FBI Director James Comey will replace that annoying guy as the Flex Seal spokesman because he knows a thing or two about leaks. No, we'll move on. I was told not to do that. Uh-oh, I'm going to get in trouble. Hurry up, move the slide. All right, hot topic number 4. All right, don't report me now. I didn't do my taxes yet. All right, duty of care and cybersecurity. We heard it a couple of times this morning mentioned. Okay, and it's a very hot topic for everybody. Duty of care, both physical care, so knowing where someone is, providing them safety and security where they are going, and then the care of the personally identifiable information. Mr. Bergen talked about it this morning, right? How do we manage those two? Now, this is a must for all travel programs. However, the threats, both physical and cyber, are increasing exponentially, okay? It's not just where you go. It's also how easily you can be penetrated from the perspective of cybersecurity, okay? So, with that as the overarching kind of concept here, how does the government keep pace with this? And who's most responsible for doing so? So I'm assuming, Bill, you have a pretty, robust guideline relative to duty of care. We need to know where you are. Do you place the burden on, well, who shares the burden? Let me just stop there and ask you. Yeah. Is the burden on the traveler as much as it is on you guys?
So from my perspective, the burden is on all aspects of the process. As John Bergen talked earlier, there's a responsibility that the traveler has as well, particularly when we're talking PII as well. I mean, if you think about it, travelers on their personal phones with their personal affairs put data in and interact with industry. We think about banking every day. Sure. So they have a personal responsibility there. They share that same responsibility with PII and anything that they turn in as well. So you got to have sound business practices there. At the same time, the government has a responsibility as well. And it's not just the Defense Travel Management Office. The duty of care piece from us really comes in when you're talking about rental cars, when you're talking about air travel and things such as that as well. I mean, we have 16 rental car agreements out there. And a big component of that is duty of care. Okay, so if something happens and someone's driving down the road, what do? Do you have sufficient materials in the car so that you can repair the flat yourself, or can you reach out and can you call the rental car company, and are they going to be responsive to you, and are they going to come there, and are they going to help you, resolve the situation and so that you can continue to travel again. So that's just one aspect and one example of it there as well. There's also a privacy office. So while I have duty of care concerns for travelers, there's a privacy office that talks to PII as well. And there are certain standards out there for PII that automated systems need to meet. And so when we start to talk about industry solutions, there's going to have to be a meeting of the minds and collaboration between industry and government policy persons. And I really talk about the the privacy office of Department of Defense and the components, where they come together and ensure that those standards are in sync. But from my perspective, it's really taking care of travel. And duty of care is more than just making sure someone's safe. It's making sure that we understand what is it that you want, what is it that you don't like about our systems, how can we make your travel experience better as well. So that's maybe a little bit different from what most people think, but that's an aspect and a component for it as me as well. Today in DTS, we really don't have legacy. We really don't have customer service. Customer service, goodness. Query capability, survey capability, customer survey capability. Why don't we?
Yep.
Why don't we? Why don't I have that kind of feedback? You heard me talk about Google Analytics earlier. You heard me talk about data earlier. It's really important to me to understand as well, what is it that the customer wants and what is it that I'm not doing and I'm not giving them that can help them with their job as well. So to me, and that might be a little different angle than many people will think about, but that's my personal perspective on it as well.
Mike, I'm going to come to you because you guys have invested pretty significantly in this whole realm, like not only building tools that people can use, but also in maintaining an architecture. Because if I was listening to Bill, he said everyone's responsible. The government's responsible, the traveler's responsible, and all of my tech partners are responsible, and service providers are responsible. So I expect everybody to be in on this. So share how easy or difficult it is for you guys to keep pace.
So it's hard for me to improve on that answer. So we absolutely would agree this is a shared responsibility between the traveler, the employer, and the technology provider and the service provider. I think though, when the opportunity that we see with safety and security is the efficacy that is provided by a platform approach. And your ability to deliver well-informed, timely safety and security is enhanced when you have the greatest data available to you. What was booked, what's actually being executed, what's being expensed, what's coming through on the credit card. If you can consolidate all that data in one place in a very timely manner, that allows you to communicate much more quickly, much more effectively, much more accurately to those travelers. So, obviously, PII, data security,
One aspect,
tons of work around that. But it really, I think it's, and that's just sort of table stakes. The opportunity to differentiate your service, however, comes in your ability to aggregate that data in a platform.
How about the concept of, I was at a conference yesterday, literally, and the CEO of iJet, security company, talked about the fact that he's now created feeds from all of social media. And what he is doing with that is he's tracking Twitter feeds, he's tracking Facebook postings, and he said he was able to get advance notice that Fredericksburg was happening and that he could say it's now a yellow because we've seen that there's some confrontations that are starting to happen. And it escalated from there. So the concept of you guys are in one realm, you're controlling your own environments, but Nick, when you get into as a service provider and you say, hey, how can I stay ahead of, this guy's on the street, he's a traveler of mine, right? What happens if something goes down? What do I do? Or are you just saying at that point, look, I just got to make sure I know how to communicate with him, keep him out of harm's way?
No, I think it's a multifaceted challenge. And quite frankly, there's a reason that iJet exists. There's a reason why International SOS exists. And it's our job to create the right, I mean, Mike is absolutely right that it's not this is a team sport. Duty of care, I absolutely believe, is a team sport because you don't get enough information from a travel PNR. You need that credit card information if you want more kind of real-time activity. You could even start tapping into your travelers' iPhones and start geofencing people if you wanted. If you wanted to explore that kind of capability.
Yeah. Well, Facebook actually has a service that does that.
It does
right?
that.
So they're all kind of tracking in if you want to be tracked.
Yes.
What they saw was it was not tracking. It was we want to create a location awareness.
So let me give you a perfect example of that. Sorry to interrupt. So I was in Bangalore 2-3 weeks ago. Anybody been to Bangalore?
Anybody been to Bangalore?
Bangalore, India? Interesting airport. You are not allowed to enter the airport. There's a armed military personnel, unless you have a printed on paper, not on your phone, printed on paper itinerary.
Yes.
They check your name off and then you go in. When I landed, turned my phone on, I had a text message waiting for me from Concur saying, hey, don't forget when you need to leave, you need to have a printed itinerary or you're not going to get past the guy with the gun. So that was a great
example of.
I didn't know that. Now,
Right.
now there's much more mundane purposes for that. When I landed yesterday, turned my phone on, I had a message about, hey, here are the most efficient and economical ways we recommend for you to get to your destination.
Good point. Or where to eat dinner tonight.
Yeah.
Within policy. Phil, you're going to say.
So let's talk about that particular piece there and take it a step further. So we have young recruits that go through MEP stations, and those young recruits have to go through a certain process in order to be qualified to go to training at training battalions. MEPCOM is responsible for those recruits up until the point of time that a button is pressed and they go to get on the airplane to go. I would like to know the direction that they're going in. I would like to understand the weather conditions. I would like to know if there's a high probability of those flights being canceled.
disrupted.
I would like to know if their travel is going to be disrupted, so that perhaps we don't put them in the air and we don't put them through that kind of experience. Why? Because in many cases, many of them, it's their first time away from home. And let me tell you who's interested in their travel: mom and dad.
Parents.
And let me tell you who hears it if there's a problem with mom and dad. Or for me. So when you talk about duty of care and you talk about being able to advance knowledge of things, let's add in also advanced knowledge of weather and flight reservations and probability of flight. I would love to see something like that as
It's
well.
all part of it.
All
Erika,
part of it.
anything to add?
No, I think that, ultimately it is about making sure that the passenger is safe. It's making sure that you're bringing together everything they are already willing to share. That's the huge issue about personalization. And for the traveler in general, what they say and keep on saying loud and clear is, I put out so much data for you to consume that lets you know about me, about my preference, about what I like to do, how I like to do it, when I like to do it. Please use it wisely. It's already encrypted. Technology companies invest so much money in making sure that the information is safe. So while, yes, of course, there are security breaches that we hear about, it really is about finding a way to bring it all together in a smart way for the traveler.
Yep. Yeah. You can have all the best intentions in the world, but when that recruit says, hey, going off to Mogadishu on Facebook, everybody knows he's taking off.
Everybody knows.
Right? Yeah. All right. One thing I want to, before we leave this topic, just share that, but when a bunch of you said this a couple of times about personalization, and I think that's where general technology is going. So what you will see is that once you learn a little bit about me, I want you to use that to serve me, right? So if I've been to the same place, like Mike said 10 times, Nick said it, I take the same trips, then serve that up to me. Make it simple for me. I don't need to go through a big search and do this very complicated thing. When I arrive, suggest something to me, because I'm getting in at 6 o'clock, I'm going to have dinner somewhere. Why not do that? That's where technology is going. People are now not asking for the information, they're expecting that it gets pushed to them. The Amazon experience. You did this, now you probably like to do this. All right, let's leave this cybersecurity one here. Let's go to hot topic number 5. This is buy versus build. So now you're about to put a solicitation out on the street, and so I pull this down, just kind of how you answer. This is in general technology. How you answer the technology build or buy question ultimately comes down to 5 common considerations. Time to market, how quickly do you need to get the product out there? How much is this going to cost? Is it cheaper for us to build it or buy it? What are the features and functionalities? You've got a very specific list of features and functionalities, right? That comes into it. Our knowledge and expertise. I would suggest the government is probably not a subject matter expert on building technology platforms. And then, again, back to the core competencies. So these are the 5 things that companies think about when they make that decision. Okay, what should we do? Should we buy or build? So my question, given the complexity of the requirements, should the DoD and the government in general take a buy versus build approach to the travel technology platform? Now I'm going to get the easy ones out of the way. Mike and Erika are probably going to say, you need to buy this stuff, right? Am I right? Yeah. Okay.
I even have an idea who you should buy it from.
Well, yeah.
So,
There's a shameless plug. Nick, you guys are in the position where you have built some stuff and you've bought some stuff. So share your kind of experience and your take on this one.
So it's interesting because I've spent the last almost 2 years here in the government sector and many more than that in the commercial sector prior to, all in business travel. And there's an interesting phenomenon that I see here that I have not seen elsewhere, which is when it comes time to do research and development and to kind of ask interesting questions like this, it's kind of like, you know, when I get sick, I go see the professional, I go see the doctor. So we want to know more about what goes on in industry. Well, we're going to talk to the people who sell us stuff. And quite frankly, we're all self-motivated to some degree in that exercise, where I think there can be, you know, there's a veritable buffet of other consumers of business travelers or of business travel out there. And all of them pale in comparison, by the way, in terms of size comparative to the DoD. But if you look at Accenture, HP, GE, Northrop Grumman, all of these companies also consume business travel. And they are kind of driving to some degree the direction that companies like mine or Concur or you know, the GDSs take in terms of you know, how we package solutions. So you know, generally for us, when we decide around build versus buy, I can tell you it's about, you know, we build those things where we think we can create a bit of competitive advantage, and we buy those things where we're just never going to be a leading capability. As an example, you know, CWT does not own an online booking platform. We integrate and resell Concur. We integrate and resell Get There. You know, in fact, we integrate and resell, sadly, you know, 17 others. I wish it was just one.
Makes it more challenging.
But and we might get there, but it's not. So to me, I think, you know, it's very clear that there's expertise around how to create that right ecosystem, and I would love to see a stronger connection between what is done in the corporate world, in the corporate context, and corporate procurement managers, and what's done in government.
So Bill, over to you, because this is ultimately the big question you guys will have to answer. So I'm curious on your take here.
So traditionally, the federal government has built, and that's just been the direction. John Bergen talked about that as well. We have a cross-functional team for travel. I think John talked about that also. A cross-functional team's mandate was to go through the back process, develop high-level IT and functional requirements that we could pass to industry. The idea there was then a solicitation of a white paper and have industry come back and give us their best ideas and solutions for how to move forward with those high-level requirements that we put on the street. The answer and the conclusion is the direction that we're moving into now is really we're getting away from build, because there's a sustainment tail, there's a maintenance tail, there's a sustainment tail, there's a build tail. Typically when you build, I said a build tail, there's challenges with building. Typically when you build, those applications end up being highly customized as well. Customization is just a trend that the federal government and the IT gurus and gods are trying to get away from today. So we're looking really more at configuration versus customization. I personally, and this is me personally, and so I'm going to go on the record and say this, there may be some opportunities for customization. And I can think that there might be some in the future as I look at some policy challenges that we have that are guided by legislation. But as a rule, we're looking at configuration now. And configuration is essentially tied more to buy now. And so John said it, we're looking at a service capability.
Yeah, a lot of the reasons why you don't build is because of some of the stuff I heard this morning. It's a 15-year-old system.
15-year-old system.
15-year-old system. How does it adapt? How does it, and maintaining something you built is a whole nother headache.
And customizing
And
it, which
customize. That's
makes
right.
it even more complex
That's
as well.
exactly
So that's the legacy. That's the legacy of our legacy system that we've had. And you don't see that just in travel. I used to work in civilian personnel, and I was responsible for managing those personnel IT systems. The same thing there. I would suspect if you look in logistics, you'll see the same thing in terms of the legacy systems, where we have built many systems before in the past. The trend, at least for travel, and you hear John say we're kind of at the point of the spear right now, is by.
I kind of joked, and I don't want to overlook either Erika or Mike here, but I assume the words of advice to everybody is these things are not easy to build, right? Whether it's a booking tool, expense tool, or look, GDS has been around for 50-some years, and it still works very well. These are not trivial systems to build or maintain. So that's part of the kind of calling card is, hey, it's really hard to do.
It's expensive to do, particularly if you want to have global capabilities, particularly if you want to have, again, this platform integration capability, so you have a connectivity across multiple functions. But I think the point you raised was, can you move from something that needs to be customized to something that can be configured? And I would say, again, not to dismiss the unique requirements of military and government, but Concur, for example, has 30,000 plus customers. That's a lot of customers that have a lot of unique needs that have found a way to, manage that within a configuration scenario.
Yeah. Erika, anything to add? Close us out?
No, I think Mike is spot on. The issue is it's quite expensive, and not only that, what I do think is making a difference is that unlike technologies before us, our platforms are not quite agile. So they are starting to be a lot more configurable, if you will, and therefore allow for customization to be a lot easier. And I think that the adoption of if-and platforms that allow for certain rules and adoption of these rules and incorporation into the specific needs of our individual customers is something that is now, it's a fact. It's no longer a promise of the future. It is the way that technology can be configured, and this makes all the difference in the world in partnering.
All right. Let's move forward. Not a true or false. Got to move through that one really fast. Come on, hurry up. All right. Let's go to part 2. I try. I can only move the clicker so fast. All right. Closer to the truth. I'm going to pose a statement. As artificial intelligence advances, artificial intelligence is, hey, Alexa, turn on the radio. Okay? And Google and Amazon and other tech giants continue to invest in technology designed to enhance the traveler experience. Which statement is closer to the truth? Is it A, today's government travel program will undergo a seismic shift that will feature less traveler oversight in the next 24 months? He's already laughing, so I'm guessing he's voting B. Or B, the impact of government travel will be slow or non-existent, with the status quo being maintained for the next 24 months. Bill, status quo?
I actually vote for A. I think A is going to happen. What you've heard is you've heard that there's a solicitation that's going to hit the street.
Okay.
We are moving forward. There are great expectations. SecDef, DepSecDef, Secretary of the Army. You heard John Bergen talk about it. There's a lot of excitement.
Okay.
There's also a lot of expectations and pressure on me,
Make it happen.
the director of the Defense Manpower Data Center, and others, and Bill Booth, who was here earlier, to actually make it happen and execute. So I think it's going to go fast, and I think you're going to see some progress. Now, don't ask me to get into details about how much progress, because we said we were going to build it incrementally. So first is business travel. Why? Because 46% of travelers in FY16 did business travel in the Department of Defense. Business travel most closely approximates what corporations do. So a business capability or business service that we purchase should be closest to the business travel aspect that the Department of Defense does. So I think there's low-hanging fruit. I think we have a great opportunity to be successful. And there's a key piece of this, too. We talked about customization versus configuration. So now that talks about governance. And some people say governance slows things down. But if you streamline your governance, if you have an agile governance process, if you have the right people in the room, and something that we haven't necessarily had as much as we should have perhaps in the past is executive level governance. And if you bring the right people together from the right communities at the right time with the right leadership, you can actually make those tough decisions that you have to make with configuration versus customization. I say we're going to make progress, and I'll be here next year, and you can call me on that.
Okay, but
call me out on that.
Mike, A or B?
Okay, but I'm gonna no, it's A, but I'm gonna object to less oversight.
Yeah.
Okay.
you're going to see
Yes.
better, smarter oversight that's lighter weight, more
Government.
efficient.
Okay, so
and a
Exactly.
perfect-
very
a
good.
per-
All right, round of applause.
Exactly.
Good, I got it.
But so here's
Smarter
a perfect,
oversight.
here's an example how you're going to see that. And we're seeing it today within Concur on expense report fraud detection. That is just a perfect for an AI machine learning
To fix
ability to detect, like, hey,
Yes.
everybody else is
Figure it
doing
all out.
this, you're doing that, I want to look at that, so let's not waste time over here. I think the same thing for vouchers, right, is just a perfect
Okay.
opportunity.
Yes.
Perfect opportunity.
I
You
believe.
you guys are both A, so I'm going to go to the next one. All right, let's go to the next one. Show of hands. Anybody in the audience? A or B? A? Quite a few. How about B?
What is that be?
I think we had more A's. That's good. That's interesting. All right, closer to the truth, number 2. With the advent of IATA, International Airline Travel Association's new distribution capabilities, everybody know about NDC? All right, good. The continuing fragmentation of airline content and more direct distribution by airlines and hotels, Book It Direct by Hilton, right? You see it on TV all the time. Which statement is closer to the truth? Is it A, airlines and hotels will continue to push for more direct approach where content continues to fragment, forcing the traditional travel ecosystem on the stage today to adapt? Or B, the GDSs will all become NDC compliant and continue to be the primary way that airlines and hotels sell all their content, including ancillaries. I'm going to get you out of the way, because I know you're B. But go
Actually,
ahead.
no, combination of A and B.
All
We'll
right,
save that for
go ahead,
later.
let's hear it.
No, so I think absolutely. Airlines will continue to push and will want to drive things their own way. I think that the way that travel exists today and the way that the traveler that we have so much talked about wants to consume data will force companies and platforms and whether it's the TMCs or online agencies to bring it all together in a way that the traveler can consume it at the same time. And for that, I honestly don't believe there is another entity other than the GDSs that can do
Be
this.
a place that can do it. Nick, A or B?
B?
B.
I tend to agree with everything Erika just said. It's even as we move to all NDC is a communication standard. It's not even new. It's 20 years old. And it's about consuming rich content. So can I see the way American wants to package all of its because you're not just buying a seat anymore. You're buying a seat and potentially baggage or leg room for Mr. Bergen. And I believe. And it's safe to say all of the GDSs are already to some degree NDC compliant. It's just about how quickly they can get through that ongoing development. But the idea that there is a central repository of stuff that travelers can then consume, because at the end of the day, it's not about a supplier's content, it's about everybody's supplier content. So the idea of comparison shopping and transparency, I think, will remain paramount from a customer's perspective.
Totally true. You guys, I think I saw Mike Primo's on the agenda. My guess is he'll tell you a little bit, because I saw him speak yesterday, and he talked, well, I don't want to steal his thunder now. Let me leave it alone. He actually talked about how EMD, electronic miscellaneous documents, the growth has been flat. So he's not seeing the uptake. And that speaks a little bit to, I think, the fact that the airlines, while they all are saying we all want to do NDC, they're deploying it in very different ways, which makes it a big challenge, right?
I think you're asking an interesting question. So B will happen. The GDS are going to be NDC compliant. That's not going to change the behavior of the suppliers.
Right.
The suppliers have an inherent business interest in creating as direct a connection as they can to their ultimate customer. They will continue that. They're going to continue to invest on that. The challenge for the people in this room, as travelers become more educated, more comfortable with their own consumer purchasing patterns, is what is this room going to do about that sales channel?
Yeah.
Stop you right there. What are you going to do about that sales channel? Because that's really comes down to you having to figure out, hey, Mike just laid out the exact scenario that's going to happen, right?
And I don't have an answer to that yet, so I'm going to punt.
Okay, that's good.
And I like all of those answers collectively together. But I also was going to want to say I'd like to see us ask that question to Mike Primo.
Good.
tomorrow. Just like you said, I want to get more information, more data on it, and then once I'm armed, I don't want to make a uninformed answer right now. on
Good
that one.
point. All right, let's move
Okay.
on. One more. I think we've got a couple more closer to the truth. Which statement is closer to the truth? With the continued push to online supplier direct initiatives and the use of artificial intelligence, the need for a travel agent will be significantly reduced. I'm looking right at you.
Ooh.
Look at a smile.
Ooh.
Or B,
Ooh.
despite the continued push to online and the use of AI, travel agents will see a resurgence as people, even millennials, feel the need for personal service and advice from a real person. I'll let you go first.
So the issue at hand is how travel management companies and travel counselors remain relevant in the future. And I would tell you A is true if our only reason for existence was to pick up the phone and book a ticket for somebody going from Minneapolis to Washington. I think our service model will necessarily evolve. We will have to evolve. And the idea of counselors becoming trusted advisors for travelers, to me, is a great model for the future. And let the machines handle all the stuff that's simple. But I like the idea of moving to a model where if we know who's calling, and let's say it's a traveler who's on his way to China for the first time, chances are the way we've traditionally done TMC configuration is travel counselors exist where a company is headquartered, so that's where they call. But in this instance, wouldn't you want to talk to somebody who knows everything about China? So you might actually speak to a Chinese national and kind of work through all of the other issues and advice that you may need for that trip. So I think that's where our service model is going to evolve. That was going to be one of my predictions, but I got to put it up now.
okay.
So it's all right. I've got something else teed up. But I think the service model will have
We'll
to change.
continue. Erika?
I think the challenge is that it will be a combination of real people and fake people, bots.
The AI.
And the reason for this is that if you think about it, the millennial traveler or the new upcoming traveler, they want it all to be about them. So when someone picks up the phone, they want that person to know absolutely everything about them. And you can only get that through a combination of a bot and a real person. They want the real voice, but at the same time, they want you to know what they tweeted when they tweeted, if it was on Facebook, what they ate yesterday, where they ate it, where they vacationed, because they put all of that out there. So the only way that you can put that together is by
with a
combining both.
combination of both. Bill, anything to add?
Yes, I like Nick's answer. I think.
You didn't like mine?
No, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you too. Nick first. So let me clarify that. Okay,
You like
come
both
on.
answers.
I like both answers. Let's talk about Nick's first. I think it's going to evolve. I really do. I think it has to evolve for all of the reasons that Nick said, and I agree with that. But I think there's going to always be a role for travel management companies. I like the trusted advisor piece. But then I think about a couple of places that I've traveled to. So I've been to Fort Bragg. Matter of fact, I was in Fort Bragg with you, Nick. I am going in the very near future to Louisiana, New Orleans. Someone's got to do it, so I'm going to take one for the team there. And we're going to visit Mount Forez, Marine Corps Reserve. They have an incredible mission, and their peak travel season is approaching right now. You just can't do some things without a travel management company.
Sure.
Those are just two examples right there. 3-hour tour at Fort Bragg, it was impressed upon me the need. So it's going to evolve and it's going to change some, but at the same time, there's a role and there will always be a role.
Sounds good. All right, let's move on because we got one more of these. Government travel takes on many types. Bill and I talked about this. I think there are 7. Given the wide variety of requirements, which statement is closer to the truth? Is it A, the days of a one-size-fits-all approach are over and government travel needs to be more closely emulate consumer travel where people choose how to book and travel, or the regulatory environment and constraints involved will never allow government travel to provide the flexibility found in consumer or even business travel? So, Mike, go.
So obviously, I think the answer is A. And I think the key for you to arriving at the answer is to know your travelers and know their needs. And so the example I'll use on the corporate side, generally 10% of the travelers drive 50% of the transactions. The other 90% drive the remaining 50. The other interesting thing to remember is that typically, 20% of travelers have a change, require assistance. The other 80% don't need assistance executing a transaction. I think your ability to understand those key demographics and behaviors will help you find the right answer to that question.
Modify the program. Anybody else, real quick? All right. Okay, let's move on. Our final thing that I asked you guys to do, we got 3 minutes left, so we're going to do this fast, is
away from that one.
looking into the future. Tell us, make a prediction, something that you believe that's going to happen within the next 12 to 18 months that will have a major impact on travel in general, and if you can, you get extra credit on government travel. Who wants to start? Prediction? I think I'm going to make one for Bill.
I'll be back next year.
Will be on the street momentarily. No,
I'll be back next year. That's one prediction I'm
He'll
going
be
to make.
back next year. All right, that's good.
Number 2, the solicitation will be on the street. And number 3, to tie into what I said earlier, travel modernization will move forward.
Okay.
That's right. It will move forward.
Got
It
it.
will move forward.
I think that modernization is going to make dramatic steps to more closely resemble the corporate and even consumer purchasing and transaction management processes.
Okay, good one. Erika?
I think the travel industry in general will be more humanized by the end user experience, and more it will be that end user experience that will drive the way we do absolutely everything
Human
else.
end user experience will drive it. Nick, close us out.
So I 12 to 18 months is too short a time frame, but I think when it's all said and done, Elon Musk is going to have a much larger impact on the business of travel than will Zuckerberg or Bezos or any of the
all right,
GAFA
interesting.
guys.
We'll have to check back on that one. Ladies, I'm going to make my prediction. I won't be invited back for those bad jokes. All right. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Phenomenal panel. Bill, Erika, Nick, and Mike.
Very nice.
Very nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you.